Thanks for tuning in to Relay Wire. I'm going to jump really into the last two Q posts, mainly 3951, but I will just give you a little bit of commentary on 3950, which is bigger than you can possibly imagine, the Great Awakening. And I've been down the rabbit hole for well over a decade. And I like to listen to programs like Project Camelot. I am on the edge of my seat and very intrigued about what could possibly transpire here. I know Project Camelot goes way, way down the rabbit hole sometime, talks about the DUMBs, the deep underground military bases, and the alien contingent. But I'm going to stay away from that for tonight because I think when I watched the Out of the Shadows documentary outlined in post 3951, it really hit home because about a decade ago I read the book The Franklin Coverup by John DeCamp, and it really talks about some of the same things. Really, it transpires with a kid named Paul Bonacci in Omaha, Nebraska, which was notoriously known for being an incredibly tough town. I actually have two friends that grew up there and said that their dad carried a loaded handgun on the seat of his pickup truck at all times. So that kind of sets the stage for what type of town that actually was. I know there were, in the 80s, they had something there called the Satanic Panic because there were a number of ritual murders there. There were also lots of rumors that tons of snuff films were actually made in Omaha and that it was a notoriously corrupt town in the 80s. I think I'm really going to focus on three things in that book because it relates to not only the Out of the Shadows documentary, but also a lot of things that are going on today, which basically shows the more things change, the more they stay the same. And this rabbit hole is really deep. It's been going on for quite a long time, and who even knows how long, but this was documented in the 80s and the 90s. So we've known about this type stuff for quite a while. So the story of Paul Bonacci is really that he got involved in this ring of male prostitution and drugs and so forth. And it really focused around some of the folks at Offutt Air Force Base. They would take planes out of that Air Force Base, apparently, and go to places like Bohemian Grove, like conferences in Chicago and parties in Washington, D.C., likely to blackmail people or traffic and different type of nefarious activities. The other thing that Paul actually cites is that he did run into somebody named Johnny Gossett, and Johnny was one of the first kids. He was abducted from Davenport, Iowa, and was one of the first kids ever on one of those milk carton missing kids pieces. And he knew things about Johnny Gossett that really only someone that had met him would know, which is ironic because Paul did some time in jail because of they claimed that he committed perjury in fingering some of the high-level political figures locally and around the country. They claimed it could not possibly be true. Well, in hindsight, looks like it was true, but obviously they were using the law to squash his testimony because it would be very publicly damning for him to be had been proven right. The other piece of this is that the president of the Franklin Credit Union, a guy named Larry King, was pretty high up in the Republican Party at the time. He actually, at the '88 Republican Convention, introduced George Bush Sr. as their nominee. The other piece of this is that Larry apparently went to jail for 13 years for misappropriating the funds of the credit union, somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 or $60 million. But that was the trigger to the '80s savings and loan crisis that swept through all these states. And I know there was a credit union that had some involvement with the Bushes, I believe, in Colorado, that had quite a bit of financial problems. But the other piece of this, I think, is that back to the Offutt Air Force Base and some of the figures that are outlined in the Out of the Shadows documentary, there's this MKUltra contingent that cycled around the top level figures at that Air Force base. So it looks like they were doing all kinds of nefarious activities there, which were importing drugs, running prostitution rings, brainwashing people, and doing whatever type of testing they thought might yield assets for their MKUltra program there. And it really goes back, and again, I know that they're around the ritual murder piece. That was the kickoff of the Satanic Panic. Is a bunch of people around that Air Force base were in fact stabbed to death in ways that would relate back to some type of satanic cult killing or ritual murder type piece. One of the other pieces that are involved in that story is the name of the CIA director at the time, a guy named Bill Colby. And so this goes, again, right back into the camp of the CIA and all their dark programs and stuff of that nature. Really, I'm thinking around the same time, you would have had people like Barry Seals doing stuff inside of Arkansas with the airports, the closed down military airports down there. So there was just all kinds of stuff has been going on for a very long time, and it is related to the government in a huge overlap. So I think that Drain the Swamp is really can't be overstated at this point. We make it look like that this is a bunch of renegade folks and terrorists, and really it turns out that we are our own worst enemy, and your tax dollars have been involved in this. One of the other pieces that I think was in fact being investigated at the Offutt Air Force Base with the MKUltra piece was in fact using radio signals and using microwaves to in fact control people, scramble their brains, whatever you whatever you believe that can actually do. There were some testing going on related to that aspect. You look at this and say, how does this relate to 5G, which is in fact microwave-based stuff? And then we go back to, I don't want to finger the Air Force, but a lot of these were in fact Air Force bases. You go back to ChemTrails and stuff of that nature and say they're dropping metal particles, barium and aluminum and all this kind of stuff like that. How does that relate to microwave signals and so forth? And then I think the last piece of it is you talk about Vaccinations, the Gates Foundation, all these folks that are down that aspect of the rabbit hole. Realistically, and this is, I'm sure, quite the simplistic view on this, but what happens when you stick a fork in your microwave? It's not very good. So if you are breathing in these metal particles or having these metal particles in some way injected into you, and then you are hit with microwave frequencies like a 5G, what does that actually do to your body? So I'm going to leave it at that. This is going to be a short one tonight, but I just wanted to relay that information. I hope you're able to research it a little bit and see what you think. Feel free to subscribe if you like the podcast. Love to hear comments back. I will do my best to, in fact, reply to anything that you guys post in the best way that I can. Have yourself a great night. Thanks for listening.